What's going on? Charles Botensten here. So we have a book today that, I hope it offends you. You know why? Because everyone is getting offended so easily. I know I just said that with an accent, which is funny, offended with an A. But this book is probably necessary for most people, and it obviously has a very controversial title, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Mark Manson essentially goes into, it's not a long read, it's only probably 200 and, just at 200 pages. And essentially what the book talks about is that we give a fuck about everything. We care about everything. And the problem is when you care about everything, you secretly care about nothing. Because if you say, I care about everything, you don't have time for anything. In today's hypersensitive, just PC world where everyone is just offended by someone else's comment to someone, like people are offended for other people. For other people. You're offended for other people. And then you make sure that they're offended. And what this book is talking about is that what we're trying to do is just make these safe spaces for people, not knowing that pain is necessary. Life is painful, okay? To build a muscle, you have to break it down and then you build it up. That's painful. When you're going through a breakup, when you're going through a divorce or bankruptcy, talk to anyone that went through anything painful. Most of the time they come out and they say that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Perfect example for me. I went through some really tough breakups, but it made me a better person because I said, okay, you know what? This is what I really want in a spouse or in a relationship. Another example is that announced layoffs in 2009 when I was at Oppenheimer Funds. And I was like, all right, you know what? Put me on the list. I don't want to be here anymore. It was painful. People said this is the dumbest thing you could do. I don't know why you're doing it. It was the best thing. I got into real estate, started at a small firm, went to a big firm, and then I started my own firm. At the time, it was painful. It was a recession. No one had jobs. No one was looking for jobs. No one had money. No one was buying. And it was really painful time. But that was the best time because if you can survive that, your confidence is incredible going into the next challenge. And that's really what he talks about in the book, is that we think that we should not feel any pain. Like that life should just be painless. Like anything that happens, great, there's pain along the way. Elon Musk, Thomas Edison, any of these guys, they failed and failed and failed. You don't think they thought about quitting? You don't think that it was painful, that people tried to shame them? You can't invent the light bulb. You can't take a rocket to space, Elon Musk. And sure enough, 2009, look at the interviews. He was a week away from just complete bankruptcy on SpaceX. And then finally, literally on the 9th hour, when he had to pay out employees, he gets funding. And he said if the third rocket failed, because he had two other ones, and it was painful, and you listen to him in the interview, the guy's practically crying. And he's just saying that was he actually had to stop one of the interviews because it was getting teary-eyed. Because it wasn't a great experience. You know what? He just launched, for the first time, a rocket into space, landed, and then relaunched it. First time in history that has ever happened, because when you launch a rocket to space, usually don't reuse it. Anything painful in life is necessary. You have to understand that. And I didn't before this book. So The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. You have to only give a fuck about certain things. About things you care about. I'll give you an example. For me, I don't give a shit about politics. I don't care. I really don't care. Because through osmosis, maybe a 0.001% of my life is affected. You know what? What he brings up in the book is that I choose two things. How to respond when something happens. Higher taxes, a breakup, a bankruptcy. I choose my response. I can either get pissed off or someone says, okay, this is an opportunity to make more money because I'm getting taxed more. There's a recession, so that means I have to make more sales calls instead of bitching and moaning. All right? This book is 100% necessary for everyone. And to be honest, the beginning part is just, I can't even tell you because I'm just going to go really quick through a couple of the chapters. Honestly, the first 50 pages, if that's all you read in the book, you're set. Okay? So number one is we have a feedback loop from hell. So in other words, we get up, we do something, it's painful, and then we don't do it, and then we stop. Going to the gym, waking up early, starting a company, approaching a pretty girl, asking a guy out. Whatever the case is, making a sales call, and then you get rejected. We feel that we shouldn't get rejected. Like I had that mentality. You know, I was born into a very nice environment, you know, where it's like, be safe, don't try anything. They didn't coddle me, but they said, be safe, you know, watch your back, you know, things like that. So I was always nervous because I thought I should not feel pain. I thought that it just, the feeling of rejection is one of the things that I should not feel, that shame, that embarrassment, that public humiliation. And the last thing is, with rejection, he says, you have to understand is that if you tie, this is super important, if you tie your self-worth to their outcome, which you cannot control, you can't control what they say or what they do. And if you tie your self-worth, so here's an example. You approach a pretty girl, or you ask a guy out, or whatever the case is, and they say no. Myself, before reading the book, and before most of my self-improvement years, I would think it's me. But who's to say they didn't have a good day, they already have a boyfriend, they already have a girlfriend, I'm not their type, it was a bad approach, or whatever the case is. I tied their outcome to my self-worth. And a lot of people say, well, I don't do that. I don't tie my self-worth to it. Well, you can either tie your confidence, your ego, your anything to their response. If you tie anything to their response besides just complete, just unaffectedness, you'll be fine. So number one is don't try. Number two, happiness is a problem, okay? So this is crazy. So that's chapter 2, is that happiness is a problem. So essentially he talks about is that happiness, we strive for happiness. And he said that happiness doesn't happen by a result. In other words, we say we open a company and we get our first customer. We're happy, but happiness is actually doing something that is painful and actually knowing that we survived. As Tony Robbins says, is that progress equals happiness. Is that the only way to progress, the only way to progress in general is to go a little bit outside of our comfort zone, because that's not progress. If we just stay in our little cocoon and we build up this wall and we don't go outside of it, there's no progress, because the wall is the same around you. You're still in the glass house looking on the outside, seeing that everyone else is happy. Happiness isn't forever. It ebbs and flows, as what he talks about, is if we start retreating, if we start retracting, if we stop progressing, and it's not quantum leaps, it's small little incremental steps. Perfect example is the book Slight Edge. Another one is Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And he says, this is actually really interesting, he says emotions are overrated. And this is one of the biggest things that I read, and the reason I breathe it in is because when I first read about this, and I don't know where I first, it's one of those things that you first hear about and you're like, what do you mean emotions are overrated? And then they took it a step further and they say, you are not your emotions. And we're about to do a book review on The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. He also wrote this is the Surrender Experiment, but he also wrote The Untethered Soul. And essentially, and what Mark Manson, the author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, talks about is that we are not our emotions. We tie ourselves to our emotions. When we're happy, we do things. When we're sad, we do things. In other words, we don't do things, or we do things. Like if we're sad, we eat like shit. And we don't eat healthy when we're sad. When we're happy, we're willing to smile and tell jokes and be confident and do things we normally wouldn't do. So what he says is that if we tie our emotions to our actions, so in other words, when I feel happy, excited, enthusiastic, ready, then I will do something. When I feel happy, when I feel motivated, he said motivation doesn't happen. And he actually trashes the self-development, motivation, whole industry in general. He says, because what they thrive on is motivation. And the thing is, when you're done with the seminar and you go back home and you're in the same environment and you're not in the environment of the seminar, the same emotions from the environment that you're used to getting. So say you don't like work, those don't like work emotions of despair or angry or just lost hope, those feelings come up and then we don't take action. So he says, emotions are overrated, because if we use our if we need the right emotions to do something, we'll never do something. Because we're going to be hungover, we're going to be tired, we're going to be going through something in our personal life, yet we still need to make those sales calls. All right? And that's just chapter 2. All right? So continuing on, I got to tell you, the book is short, it's sweet, and listen, if you're offended by the title, this book is not for you. And he says that. He says that this book is not for everyone. Because if you're offended by the title, or if you're offended what he's talking about, this book is actually about you. This book is about you. Okay? And since reading the book, I've noticed, wow, why do I care about that? That doesn't even affect me at all. So what he talks about is really care about a couple of things in life. And that's the max amount of things you could really care about. If you really, really care about the environment, then do shit about it. Okay? Don't complain, well, these people, blah, blah, blah. It's like, do something or don't care. Me, I know I'm not going to do anything political. I'm not running for office. I'm not donating to anyone. I don't follow politics. I don't give a shit. I could care less. Whoever's voted in, beautiful. Okay? Perfect. And that's funny because you're offended. You're pissed off that I don't care about something you care about. But that's me. The subtle art of not giving a fuck. So that's the thing, is that you only just a little bit of things in life. And that's the thing is, people are looking at this and they're saying, well, I was taught I need to care about everything because society and social media told me I need to care about everything that's bad in the world. All right? And like, who's to say, I won't even go into that. Chapter 3, he talks about that you're not special. This is amazing, is that I run a real estate company, and one of the top things I always tell agents that are, start at the company, the number one thing that I always tell them is that you are not entitled. Drop your entitledness at the door. You could be entitled to whatever you want out in life, which I don't recommend. You're not entitled to anything, okay? You're not because you're alive, because you're in America, because you have an Instagram account, business should just flow into your life. Because you get licensed, people should just flock towards you and say, you know what, I want to use you to buy, sell, rent my apartment. It's like, no. You have to prove yourself. And even when you prove yourself, you're not entitled to a championship. LeBron James isn't entitled to a championship. He needs to work his ass off. You think about any CEO every single day. Jeff Bezos, just because Amazon is just crushing the internet, listen to what he talks about. He calls it, Tony Robbins calls it kanai. And in Japan, I think they call it kaizen, which is constant and never-ending improvement. And if you're not constant and never-ending improvement, you are Best Buy, Circuit City, Blockbuster, Barnes & Noble. Look at all those companies that did not constantly improve and try and put themselves out of business, as Gary Vaynerchuk talks about. Try and put yourself out of business. This book really fires me up. I know I'm on 13 minutes, but I'll just go over the last chapter, which is the value of suffering. And I kind of talked about it before, is that we feel that we shouldn't feel pain. Okay, we shouldn't suffer at all. But the thing is, that's how diamonds are made. That's how oil is produced. That's how combustion and cars move, is that there is suffering, there is pain, there is just an explosion. And if you don't do that, and then you're still entitled, and you feel you deserve all these things, well, you're going to live in suffering. You live in suffering if you have no money, and you live in suffering if you have money, because people say you should donate here. A lot of people look up to you because you're a leader. If you're out of weight, you're suffering because you can't move as fast. If you're going to the gym, you're suffering because you're lifting heavy weights. If you're not in a relationship, you're suffering because maybe you want to be in a relationship. If you're in a relationship and you're suffering, it's because the relationship isn't as good as what you want it to be. There is suffering either way, okay? And when we try and change the outside world to meet our non-suffering needs, then we don't actually grow, and we just protect ourselves. We just throw up this big barrier around us, and we just live in a bubble for our entire lives, and then we don't change, and then we complain and we regret things when we're older. I got to tell you, this is one of the best books that I've read in a while, and I read pretty close to a book a week on average. Sometimes I do 2 books, sometimes a week, sometimes I do 1 every 2 weeks. But this book, it was a wide opening experience, especially for someone like myself who's in sales, and I talk to people all the time, and I would judge their reaction, their response on who I was. Like, if they said no to me, I'm like, it's me. No. Maybe what you're offering them, they already have, or they don't want, or it's value, they didn't see the value. So pick up the book, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below. I really duly hope you're offended watching this, because that is the first step of growth, which is saying, you know what? Wow, I get offended way too easily by words. Someone says no, that your channel sucks, or your long hair sucks, or shave your beard, or whatever the case is. I get it all the time, you know? So anyway, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below. I love you guys. Honestly, go pick up the book. It's incredible. Have an awesome day. Talk to you guys soon.